Hi, I'm Jesse Hirsh, and this is Red-Tory, recorded live in front of an automated audience. And I'm joined, as always, by my good friend Allan Gregg. And today we got Avi Lewis for Parliament. Well, the question, exclamation.
The hype. Are there more dogs? Are there birds? What the hell's going on here, Jesse? Good.
The
God.
dogs is like a 1 in 100 chance, because that was a live shot. It's rare that they do that, but you coming here for the podcast has gotten them all excited.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Allan, we start every show, of course, with me asking you what you're paying attention to. But first, new theme song. Did we get it right?
Much better than that little jingle you had for a game show. So.
Right on. We'll see how long we can get away with it before the copyright cops come after us. But Allan, what have you been paying attention to in the last few days?
Well, I mean, I'm still consumed with this flood of legal challenges against Trump's executive orders and the prospect of them just ignoring them or defying them. And since we first talked about it a couple of days ago, just how much the entire Washington community is just saying, we don't know what would happen. We are just in such unprecedented areas. We just do not forget about the trials and tribulations and the threat that might pose. We don't know even just kind of logistically what happens after that fact. And on top of that, I was very, very intrigued by your Substack today, too, about very specifically how this relates to a lot of the Dodge initiatives in terms of mining data and accessing files and databases that they do not have authority to go into. And again, what that all means. And as you note in your Substack piece, the prospect that opens back doors for all kinds of other influences that, again, are not intended as part of legitimate rule of law government. So it again is kind of head swimming. What about you, Avi? We know you're on the stump. We know that you're going door to door.
I am.
But in addition to your constituents and what they're telling you, which you want to get into as well, anything in the news there that's kind of turning your head?
Well, I'm preoccupied by this moment. I mean, it's overwhelming. We're like in a cartoon garbage blender of a world, where every day just brings. I don't know. Actually, it's like a garburator holding tank that we're suddenly swimming in. Every single day is a chopped up mess of fragments of reality and surreality, all of which are pretty doomful. Largely pouring out of the mouth of our downstairs neighbor, the Mad King. My kid is 12 and very into American politics, and he's memorized Jimmy Kimmel's 78 nicknames for Trump, and he hasn't actually spilled them all in one flow. I get them sprinkled in, so that's at least worth it's all gallows humor, but it's a chuckle from time to time. I mean, I'm running for office. I love this format where you don't introduce the guests. It's totally lovely. But I'm certainly preoccupied with what this political moment means for Canada. And we're having a national debate all of a sudden, a long needed one, I think. Unfortunately, I feel like it's happening on utterly predictable and dismal terms, sort of set by the politics of the last century, and without a flicker of attention to the opportunity, to the existential crisis of the climate emergency, and to the desperate need for rebalancing the scales of society, which are so fucking out of whack. So I'm like everyone else, I'm raging at all my screens and saying, why don't I run the media if there was a media anymore?
Before we get into all of that, though, I mean, I'm very intrigued by your actual decision to run for public office. I mean, you come from a long line of politicians and political lineage, but you actively seem to eschew that path for the largest part of your career and chose filmmaking, media, and all the other things. I know you ran in 2021. What was the trigger event that said, no, this is the right channel for me?
I think, yeah, I mean, I guess I had spent my adult life saying no to this idea of running for politics because my grandpa, David Lewis, was one of the founders of the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation in the 1930s. David was the general secretary of the NDP's predecessor party, I think from something like 1936 to 59. I mean, he was the back room of the CCF for its early decades. And then he's better known for running and being leader in the 1972 federal election. And my dad obviously was NDP leader in Ontario in the 70s when I was growing up. And I'm pretty sure I was in diapers the first time someone said, "When are you going to run for office?" So I think I just reflexively got used to saying no, no way. I went into my mom's field, journalism. My mom, Michelle Landsberg, being the great and only feminist newspaper columnist in Canada for much of, definitely for the 1980s, I would say, in the mainstream media such as it was. And I definitely, but my career as a journalist was really aligned with social movements. And Jesse, you and I met in the 90s around some really interesting work that was being done, I think cultural work in an anarcho-leftist kind of context around the corporate takeover of public space in our lives, and alternative forms of media, open media experiments, which I'm pleased to see you're still devoted to in the way that you like open source the tech for this show, and documentary films that I've made, and the work I did with Al Jazeera in the 2010s, launching a show called Fault Lines, and even the daily live debate show that I hosted in the late 90s on CBC News World Counterspin. We launched the week that the Peppergate scandal broke. I don't know if you all remember this. And it was right around the time of the WTO in Seattle. And so the week of the the battle in Seattle, we debated 4 nights of policy, refusing to take the bait of the broken windows and the obsession with the chaos in the streets, because there were movements coming together with new technology, email, oh my God, in 1999, which was connecting social movements around the world. And it was really my coming of age, and my partner Naomi Klein's as well in that moment. So my working life has been defined by storytelling around social movements globally, and in much more in the social movement space than in the electoral space. And I think for me, a big turning point was the 2018 moment of the Squad in the United States, the Bernie moment of 2016. Naomi and I both had a lot of intersections with those folks. We met the Sunrise Kids sorry, I don't mean to be patronizing, but younger people in I think 2019. A few months after the occupation of Pelosi's office, when AOC joined them and they all chanted Green New Deal together. And it felt like this emergence of a new politics and possibility in the United States, of all places, where the S word was being spoken aloud, democratic socialism. My God, remember that? It's always like President's Choice memories of democratic socialism right now.
But on that point, let me ask you to take a relevant tangent in the context of our mandate here on Red-Tory, which is to talk about radical policies, which is recognizing that part of the problem in our public discourse, but certainly part of the problem on the left side of the political public discourse, is we've ceded the radical ground to the far right. Like, they're the ones who are getting to talk about radical policies, and they're the ones who've, even though they are the establishment, have evoked this anti-establishment ethos. So to your point about your journey to politics, take a quick tangent back to why you're running for office in terms of the role that you think these kinds of broadly, because, the Great Leap is a radical policy, even talking about some of the responses to climate change are considered radical policies. How does that impact both your motivation, but also, to your point, your trajectory, the journey that you're on?
It really is the same thing. Like in that 2018 moment, the 2016 Bernie campaign, the decentralization of it, the big organizing approach, social movement tactics and organizing strategies being brought into the electoral system in the United States with stunning effect. Of course, the establishment was quite strong enough to repel the whole thing. But the idea space and the Overton window work that basically I've been doing for a few decades now of trying to drag what seem like radical ideas, but seem to me to be really common sense ideas into the mainstream. That really was my work. And the LEAP manifesto in 2015 was another attempt at that. And the LEAP organization, where I worked full time for 5 years after that, was really an Overton window project to try to normalize and bring into the realm of conceivable political imagination ideas actually big enough to solve the crises that we face as society. And I guess I just started to feel around 2020 in the pandemic reflection that so many people went through, that we had the ideas lying around from that famous Milton Friedman quote that Naomi really anchored the shock doctrine with, that, you know, that only a crisis produces real change. This is quoting, you know, the great bard of neoliberalism, Milton Friedman. And when that crisis occurs, the change that happens depends on the ideas that are lying around. And he went on to say, like, that is our purpose. And I think he meant in the right-wing think tank world. But of course, we feel this strongly on the left, to keep those ideas alive until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. So when I really thought about a lot of the work that I'd done, I do think that through the LEAP and the Green New Deal, and when we met the Sunrise folks, you know, in 2018, early 2019, and we were gushing, oh my God, thank you for bringing us wizened climate hacks to a point of actual pride and hope. And they were like, well, we just like looked at what you guys were doing and, you know, spent a year studying different social movement attempts, and the LEAP was really, really helpful. So we're just trying to, like, and we're like, oh my God, you know, but you know, the meaningful material process of taking those ideas lying around and making them the law of the land, public policy affecting the material conditions of people's lives, that requires political institutions. And I think on the left, in Canada and particularly, we don't have a sophisticated and mature relationship between inside and outside. And I feel like because I have certain, you know, you look at the skills that you developed over the years. I've been on live TV. I'm not afraid of cameras. I talk too much, like most people on, like most, you know, guys who look like us and do these kind of media things. And I feel I could play an inside role, but my heart and my accountability and my communities and my politics are rooted outside in social movements. And we need better communication, better strategizing, and better politics between the two spheres. So that's really what pushed me, you know, into losing my marbles, having my midlife crisis, and actually running for office.
Let me put a stronger point on the question that Jesse started with there. I mean, not only is the right radical voice in politics today, but there seems to be an active resistance to move to the left or be radical, to actually offer ideas. And you talked about LEAP. You know, it had to go there for a little while, and then the party just shoved it down to the riding level, and it kind of died after a time. I was around when I first started in politics. The NDP, not only were they anti-free trade, they wanted to nationalize the banks. They were formally aligned with labor, and class politics was at the core of what they were doing.
Oh, Allan, you're stirring my soul.
Oh,
how lovely to hear this common sense come out of your mouth. Yes, do go on.
Before we can get one quick anecdote there, that I got radicalized by the War Measures Act in 1970. One of the first political events I ever went to was at the Student Union building at the University of Alberta in 1971, where your grandfather spoke and talked about corporate welfare bums.
Hell yeah.
And it was electric. And again, you know, you hear kind of this virtue signaling and performative kind of, oh, let the rich pay their fair share. But Jesse and I have talked about this before. I mean, and I'm a student of public opinion. There is way more room on the left to actually mobilize voters and get them excited, especially young people. right now who believe that not only is the system not working for them, it's actively working against them. They want to rip the system down. And again, I'm a very long preamble. I mean, your colleagues, I mean, how do they react to you? Why do they resist the kind of, more unorthodox approaches to politics rather than kind of just trying to go mainstream?
Well, can I deftly dodge that question and answer a different one that I feel like answering?
Like it's a test.
Like a true politician running for elected
Exactly.
office.
No, I can't. No, honestly, I can't. I don't speak for, the party. I definitely think what I think it was remarkable that the LEAP resolution, which I went to the Edmonton Convention specifically to, like, I'll be honest, water down a doctrinaire resolution that said the LEAP manifesto should be adopted in whole by the NDP and all future electoral decisions must be guided by it, was how the original resolution was written. I was like, well, political parties don't work that way. No. So this will never make it to the floor, but could we fashion something that would make it to the floor? And I worked with former MPs, Craig Scott and Libby Davies and Megan Leslie, my Aunt Janet Sahlberg, who's been involved in the Ontario NDP for about 6 centuries. And we, fashioned a new resolution from existing resolutions that did pass. And you're right, it did say this should be debated at the riding level. Right. But picture it, right? This was the convention where the next morning Mulcair was, tossed unceremoniously in one of the most dramatic moments in an NDP leadership situation ever. Yeah. And then in the stunned silence that followed that, I think one of the unions put up an emergency resolution that he should stay as leader for another 18 months. And he did. I don't know if everybody remembers this, but that last leadership race was like incredibly long for that reason. And a lot of people blame the LEAP resolution, which I think is, I really think it was a confluence of things. But the LEAP resolution passed on the floor in Edmonton. And Rachel Notley gave the keynote speech the night before. And my dad gave a keynote speech the afternoon before Rachel, in which he very graciously and delicately endorsed the LEAP, wholeheartedly, without a lot of hyperbole. And the members voted for it, okay? It wasn't like close. It was a big majority on the floor. So I believe that the grassroots of the NDP, including in Alberta, supports a much more inspiring, bold, fill in the now hackneyed adjective as you please, but a much more materially left populist politics. What the party decides, the caucus decides, the leaders decide, this is not something that they negotiate with candidates, this. But I think it's a big tent on the left. And I think that that my brand of politics is well known. The fact that I'm running for the second time means that I am welcome, on some level. And I don't apologize for it. And I think it's very in keeping with the direction that the party has been taking. However, I just want to say, the thing you said, Allan, about performative virtue signaling, I don't know what that term really means, but it gets at something which has really bugged people and which is not working. And I actually don't think it has anything to do with the NDP. I think it has everything to do with Democrats, with liberals, and with centrists. And can I unfold this really quickly? Because I think to me, this is fundamental.
But just for the record, the longer you go on with the answers, the longer we're going to stay here recording. So as long as you got time.
Hell yeah. I got all day for you guys. I mean,
please continue.
We're talking about the stuff that matters. I just think that what we've had in Canada is a decade of performative progressivism. And my own take, and I don't expect everyone to agree with this, but the collapse of the center and the wave of the populist far right in this moment, to me, is related to the fact that, taking Trudeau as an example, but I think you can talk about Biden, I think you can talk about Obama, I think you can talk about Martin and Chrétien. For me, it's the collapse of centrism, is that what we get, particularly with the Trudeau brand, is economic policies that have relentlessly distributed wealth upward, that have created and deepened a material crisis for working class people. And the majority of people are now paying $10 for butter, $2 for a single apple, $4,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Vancouver. And this is the result of policy, economic policy, where the banks make $50 billion a year, 5 big oil companies make more than $200 billion in a single year, and people can't afford a dignified life. That is the result of the economic policy pursued because what he does is, and what liberals always do, is they smear a sweet veneer of progressive rhetoric on top of it, right? And Paris, we're back, we're going to take climate change seriously, pronouns in bio, all the things, right?
Yeah.
And now we're getting the backlash, not against the economic engine that has created this epic crisis and a vast fissure opening through which fascist stormtroops are now marching through. The backlash is coming against the performance of progressive blah, 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 which was never fucking serious in the first place. They didn't implement any of it in real policy, and it was all a performance. And so to me, this is why we are where we are now. And this is why left populism, even eco-populism, climate populism, is absolutely a political formula that could catch fire, because we will address the existential crises we face, and we can make people's lives better through the use of government power to stand up to the real powers behind the throne in a way that we might even be able to start peeling off some of the young guys, watching people whose names we all know. And that's the politics we need right now.
And I do want to ask you about the Overton window, because I think that is a key part of this, and I like that you brought that up. But I want to state for the record, either you have access to my writing notes, or thank you, because my post tomorrow is on C.B. McPherson and possessive liberalism, which is, to your point, the underpinning of how we have this terrible wealth concentration happening under liberal government. So thanks. Your audio clip for that was gold.
No, happy to help, Jess.
But to follow up Alan's point and your assertion that the ground is fertile amongst the public for the support of these policies, but it feels to me that the Overton window is so rooted in a center right, and I feel most of our lives we've been trying to get that Overton window to go left, and we are at a moment where the media consolidation, the algorithmic control is such it's designed to keep that Overton window moving right. So I'm curious, as a media professional, as a revolutionary, if you don't mind me saying that, what would you recommend? What would you say to us, on the grassroots throughout the communications world? What do you think needs to happen to really shift that Overton window to the left?
I think so. When Friedman wrote those famous words, which I don't think were as famous before Naomi pulled them out in 2007, he was in the wilderness politically. Nixon declared, when Milton Friedman was his economic advisor, Nixon declared, we're all Keynesians now. And he had to go down and try out his neoliberal laboratory under blood and fire in Chile, under dictatorship, because the early 70s was not a friendly economic time for that kind of economic shock therapy. We may be in the wilderness, or we may be on the brink of a breakthrough. And I think that politics is so volatile these days. I think the digital acceleration of life and of communication is such that we just need to be ready for when the next wave comes along. And in the meantime, we keep trying. Right now, this is a moment when the left in Canada is starting to say, and ought to be screaming, we were right in 1988. Everything we said would come to pass with deep integration with the United States economy has come to pass. And now, as Maud Barlow warned for decades, they're coming for the water. And we're defenseless practically, because we've already sold our economy and become America's gas tank, America's lumberyard, and now will we become America's reservoir? We were right. That doesn't mean there's no joy in that, but we should absolutely be claiming what we warned about. And we had this moment now where look at what China did with the tariffs that the US put on China and the whole DeepSeek phenomenon. Those tariffs and the hoarding of super chips or the rationing of super chips towards China created an environment in which China was able to open source, or tech entrepreneurs in China were able to open source something cheaper and nimbler that didn't rely on the testosterone toxic brute force logic, not only of AI, but of this entire generation of tech overlords, and actually open source something which is elegant, faster, simpler, whatever. Not that I think it's like panacea and come to save us all, but there is an opportunity in this crisis when the US is throwing up these spiked walls on the border, economically speaking, and we have an opportunity to do a lot of the things we always said we needed to do. Which is why, what I was really reading right before we started chatting was Hadrian Mertens Kirkwood, who is one of the smartest writers on climate and on economic policy today, works at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, just put out a piece this morning saying we don't need an east-west pipeline. What a garbage idea. This is like every opportunistic fossil-fueled proposal in the midst of a crisis, like all that LNG was going to be our response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's like, first of all, tens of billions of dollars. TMX is up to $50 billion. Thanks, Chrystia Freeland, for the $20 billion that she authorized the Friday afternoon before she quit cabinet on Monday, boosting the price of TMX to us all beyond 30 plus billion to 50 plus billion. A new east-west pipeline would cost even more than that, would have to be rammed through 180 different First Nations territories, and would not be ready for a decade, 2 decades. Come on. What we need is an east-west electricity grid. Oh my God, this is a nation-building moment. This is steel, this is construction, this is tech, this is putting renewables online and doing what Europe did when Russian gas after the invasion was being held as a guillotine over their energy necks, and actually reduce their reliance on fossil fuels by like 20%, or Russian gas anyway. This is an ideal moment for that. Why the hell are we not reading this in every headline? This is the moment. And so I just think we have to keep putting these things forcefully and building power inside and outside to be ready when the moment is propitious. And then we'll take power in the state, Jesse, and then we'll have a citizens assembly and, a bunch of really, grassroots. Then we'll have direct democracy, workers cooperative. I'm just kidding. We'll get.
Don't be kidding, because I don't want to beat this to death. But I mean, I would submit that, the analysis of what the problem is well understood, and it's articulated by both the right and the left. Yeah. The difference is that the right are offering solutions to that problem. The left aren't, unlike what you just did in terms of an electrification option versus a fossil fuel option. I wonder, why the NDP wouldn't say, you know what, if elected, we will never, ever introduce back to work legislation. You know what? If someone works 40 hours a week, they must have a living wage. Restaurants, all the hospitality industry, if you're not prepared to do that, then you're going out of business. We're having no more tips. $25 minimum wage is where we're at right now.
I mean, that's not a living wage in Vancouver, Allan, but yes, minimum wage is a place to start for sure.
But whatever it is, we just got back from Europe. And just as an example, there are the gig workers, the taxi drivers, the people who are working in restaurants. They don't have tips, and if you offer them tips, they say, you know what? We would rather you come here 2 times a week and we made 10% off you than you came 1 time a week and we made 15% off you. Yeah. We've actually become allies with the small business people. First responders should be paid at least 50% more than the average wage nationally. That's a bare minimum.
I love this. Allan, it's so great that you've joined the NDP platform committee. This is you are welcome here, brother.
But are you on the NDP platform committee, Avi?
Oh, listen.
I'm a candidate. I'm knocking doors. I'm trying to get elected. That takes all my time.
I grew up in the 1960s, went to the United Church in the Canadian prairies and smoked a tremendous amount of pot. Anyone who thinks I'm a conservative doesn't understand socialization.
Ganja conservative. Yeah.
Allan, that's going to end up being a TikTok right there, though. Anyway, please, Avi.
I love that rant, and I really agree, and I think we do have the solutions, and I think there's a bunch of them that the NDP has brought forward, and there's a bunch that I would like to see them bring forward. What's working at the doors? We've knocked 4,000 or 5,000 doors in this riding since I started canvassing for
I'm interested in what kind of feedback you're getting on the ground.
Well, we talk to people about the insane price of food, and if there's a full-scale trade war with the United States, it's going to be even worse. And the NDP supports price caps. And it's something that they tried in France. And the government did a study of fair prices with producers and distributors, not with the retail giants that were price gouging, but with the rest of the food system. They came up with fair prices for like 5,000 different food items. And when they implemented them, when they regulated them, when they made them a law, food inflation came right down, expected. It's not, and we also need windfall profit taxes on corporations that are price gouging in the middle of a cost of living crisis. And we need to break up the effect of monopolies in every sector of the Canadian economy.
Yeah, no more share food. No more share buybacks. You buy back, you can't think of anything to do with your capital other than to make your existing shareholders wealthier. Exactly. 75% tax on.
I mean, all of these things we would have, what we're talking about is a government that would actually regulate corporations. The old school version of government, I'm not sure if it ever really existed, but the old school idea of government was a mediated space between capital and labor, right? And what we've had is Team Canada, which means Team Corporate Canada, which means government as a handmaiden. That's a sexist, terrible old term, but like a servant of capital. And this is what we've lived with all of our adult lives. And we actually now, scales have tipped so dramatically that we need government to actually stand up to capital. It's as simple as that. And that is, whether it resonates with you or not, when Jagmeet talks about billionaires and reining in the power of billionaires, is exactly what he's talking about. And we do need that. Now, we can quibble about the messaging and you'll do your public research, blah, blah, blah. But I feel like the core is strong. People are ready for it. And when I talk to young people who are more conservative these days, as all the polling shows, and I talk to lots of them at their doors, they've been red-pilled by Jordan Peterson and Pierre Poilievre, and they're excitedly talking about, well, just GDP is not a real measure. It's got to be GDP by capita. I'm like, okay, sure, let's talk about per capita GDP. They agree with me that there is a small elite which is screwing the rest of us.
Yes.
So sure. I call that capitalism, and I call that small elite the financialized heights of the corporate economy, and they call it the woke mob, right? And trans, etc. And we, so the first step of the diagnosis is shared between left and right-wing populism. And I think we got a lot of work to do to share the rest of the diagnosis, but the entree is there. And I'm having some great conversations with folks young and old on the basis of that fundamental worldview. We are getting screwed by a small elite, and that's just true.
So let me ask you a question sort of with your media professional hat, but also with your political instincts.
I might have to dig it out of a bottom drawer here. Hang on.
It's still there. You came for a tech check, Avi. You showed your colors.
Guilty as charged.
I fundamentally agree with the premise that elections are won door to door, right? Shaking hands. And that is, as a candidate, the most important thing you can do. But on a national level, the parties have a role in advertising and campaigns, in media. And that's where the NDP, to a certain extent, doesn't have the same resources as the corporate-backed party. Do you have thoughts on how to overcome that? Do you have thoughts on how to compensate for that, given that I agree with your premise, your hypothesis, that we are due for a big swing to the left? But and what you were describing on a door-to-door interaction is, I think, also what needs to happen. Yeah. But at the same time, I don't think that is happening in all the ridings, right? And how I'm curious what you think could happen, so that the national campaign is not outspent or outgunned or outplayed by the campaigns that have the resources, that have the corporate backing.
Yeah, I mean, we have to be real. It's a tremendous amount of money that the Conservatives have. The Liberals, when they drag in another banker to excite their real constituency, who does a banker appeal to? Just wondering. They can raise a bunch more money. And the NDP, we've got 25 seats, and we don't have the same kind of war chest. I mean, that's just real. I think there's lots to be done, and you got, politics is very like, get real. It's not, we can't pretend that suddenly $40 million is going to appear out of, in a month out of the blue. But I saw Jagmeet making appeal to content creators online. And I think there is quite an ecosystem of progressive content creators on TikTok and elsewhere. Sure. And they've been explaining things in beautiful, smart, quick, energetic ways. And I think some connective tissue there could be very powerful. I think that, again, we gotta be real. The right has been culture eats policy for breakfast, and the right has been creating culture for a generation, and that means not like a TikTok star is going to change everything, or we need our Joe Rogan, or some of these liberal pipe dreams that we saw, I think, a lot in the last election cycle in the U.S. People who are on 3 hours a day, like you guys are, starting to actually take up some wallpaper space. That's what's required, and there need to be 1,000 of them. And so, we're behind. On the left, in the online world where opinion is getting shaped, we have some bright lights. We don't have an ecosystem. As usual, there isn't anyone with deep pockets who has the interest in gathering them behind a political project. We don't have power to offer as the dangling, bait for all coming in the tent. And so we got to be real about where we're at, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be thinking, watching what has succeeded on the other side, and not just parroting it or imitating it, but actually metabolizing it and figuring out what our authentic version is of it. And I think, despite the very President's Choice memories of name of your podcast, I'm pleased to see the space. It's a contribution.
Let me take a veer on that very thought, because we talk about the system not working. Part of the system that is not working for most people is the political system. When you believe that all politicians are corrupt, that they're liars, that they're sleazeballs, and then someone says Donald Trump is a liar, sleazeball, it's like, so what? There's no big deal there. We've started a conversation, and we haven't gone very far with, but I'm especially interested in your perspective. This is, you did a piece with your old friend Libby Davies on how social movements drive change. The notion of a lot of the change that we're looking for coming not so much out of the political system, out of the party system, but more out of the grassroots. I mean, you talk about content creators, the music community. We talked about Kendrick Lamar the other day, and what his performance in at the halftime at the Super Bowl, what difference that made to a huge number of people tapping into the filmmakers, musicians, dancers, painters as a source of these things. The ecology movement and that's out there, mobilizing these organizations in aid of larger goals. Do you see any of that happening right now? I mean, we know historically, how important the United Farmers of Alberta were. We knew how important the cooperativist movement was. We knew how important the unionist movement was in changing society. Do you see any of that going on at the grassroots now?
I see a lot of people on the left reflecting on the importance of creating culture, and creating a culture which is not just welcoming, but is seductive. I think that I think it's possible to speak reflectively and critically about what it's like to be in a lot of left movements, and people are tense and grim, because we're fighting real things. Genocide in Gaza is not a fun thing to organize around. There's deep trauma when you confront these profound injustices, but also, it's hard for me to talk about this without falling into the language that I resist. But like the stress people feel of like saying the wrong thing or using the wrong words on the left is real. And that doesn't create a culture where people feel at ease, where people feel at home and people feel welcome. And the notion that movements, you need a special language guide in order to be, one of the crew in a movement, is going to keep us small, and it's going to keep us marginal. And that doesn't mean we have to have a tent so big that we don't care what people believe. We're united by common commitments to the fundamental human rights of people, to housing and health and food and to peace. But the culture on the left needs to find a way to channel more joy, to channel more, defiant celebration in the face of these outrageous injustices, and to be really welcoming and patient with people. And again, like an election campaign is a really interesting place to try out some of these things. It's a short-term autonomous community. And the people coming to work on my campaign, we have 300-400 volunteers in the pool now. And one of our big jobs is just calling everybody who's signed up and getting them to sign up for a shift. But, we have an active Discord. We have a community that gathers. We see 10, 12, 15 people regularly coming out door knocking every night. And people, I asked a new volunteer what drew her to come and knock on doors for the first time the other night. And she paused and said, it's something I'm doing for my mental health. And I was like, whoa. Right. Yeah, because we are safe with each other. Yeah. We're not doom scrolling at home in isolation, fear, and anxiety. We are actually doing something. We acknowledge all of the limits of electoral politics. We don't pretend that sending one dude to Ottawa to be 1 out of 343 is going to change the world. But we are building community power. We're talking to our neighbors about the price of butter, and we're doing it in groups of people where we agree about the injustices. We agree that there are solutions that we can articulate to each other, and we feel so much better when we do it together, when we get together and do it. And so this is the kind, I think, part of it is because it's short, the track is short, people come, and then, maintaining campaign communities between elections is much more challenging, although we really, really try. But it's that community building that was so desperately needed.
I'm itching to respond only because I absolutely love what you're saying. And it ties back to what you said earlier about how the right is ahead of us on culture. And part of that is an institutional reason, right? They have and created cultural institutions that really allowed that to flow. But to tie that to another point, I think the reason that the left is on the cusp of some really big movements is I think our culture is now starting to come into place. And I say this because I personally had a really transformative moment through the pandemic, quote, still ongoing, where I realized that I've been disabled my entire life. And I really spent a lot of time immersed in the disability justice movement and the disability rights movement, and really shifted me to kind of the ideology of care. And recognizing that the future of the left really has a lot of power around the future of care. And that strikes me to your point about the mental health appeal of canvassing, that these are the types of things that I think have a lot of potential and tremendous energy. To Allan's point earlier, that we should be paying social workers more, for example, in terms of valuing the labor out there. And before I pivot this into a completely unrelated but kind of related
don't
question,
because this is so important, Jesse.
Okay, then I'll let you respond. But I do want to say,
basically writing my next email to my list right now, so don't stop.
Right on. Since you wrote my newsletter earlier,
that's
we're
what
even.
I figured.
It strikes me, to go back to your dig or your jest about Red-Tory, that part of, and it was originally my idea for Red-Tory, and Allan was uncomfortable at it at first because he understands the real meaning. But I like red
except just, there is a hyphen between red.
I saw the hyphen. The hyphen is critical.
Yes.
I think it all happens in that hyphen, whatever
exactly.
is happening here.
Yes, in the interstitial spaces.
There you
so
go.
For me, it's red as in really red, but Tory is in artificial intelligence. Right? Tory in the sense of the effective accelerationists who want to, use AI and Mars as whatever reason to use fossil fuels, that there's some areas maybe we do want to be conservative. And it's in trying to create that contradiction, trying to create that space, that I think the ideology of care all of a sudden has a really fertile space. So go ahead. You wanted to jump.
What was the cut line on the LEAP manifesto? A Canada based on caring for the earth and one another. And I was going to jump in, Allan, when you were talking about a $25 minimum wage, the de-gigification of work, which is an incredibly important human rights campaign of our time. We need to be paying childcare workers $30 to $40 an hour.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Not just on the existential level of what does a CEO contribute to society? Why does a CEO get so much more money than a childcare worker? But because we finally have, after 35 years of liberal promises, the effective infrastructure for $10 a day childcare across Canada, and very few people are actually getting it because there's a massive shortage of care workers.
Yeah.
And the other piece of it that we've been arguing for years, and these are the ideas lying around. This is the Overton window work that we've been doing for so long now. Care work is climate work. Care work is largely done by women of color, by people with precarious immigration status. Care work is low carbon. Care work is the connective tissue of society and what holds the fabric together. And it is a low carbon green job. We talk about green jobs, we picture a guy in a hard hat, always a guy in a hard hat putting up a wind turbine. Great, we need tons of that. We need a new grid to go along with it. But the actual fundamental value of care work is that it could be the basis of our economy. Public investments are much more efficient and effective there. People's lives improve immediately. And the disability justice movement, I think, is the last great human rights movement of our time that's never actually had its moment. The way labor justice and racial justice and others, not that we've won any of those fundamental struggles, but disability justice is a lens. It helps us see the centrality of care. I teach climate justice at UBC. It's the first time that a course called climate justice has been taught there. And I share a piece by Astra Taylor's sister, Sonora Taylor, who wrote a brilliant book called Disabled Ecologies. And the essay that goes into it talks about disabled landscapes and the fact that people with disabilities actually know something about what it is to have joy, to thrive, to survive, to battle through all the obstacles that our disabled landscape, and as we are moving into a period where the earth is disabled. We've done that and we can't undo it, but there is a wisdom and a deep ethic of care and attention that we desperately need to learn from disabled folks and from the disability justice movement. It's a life skill on a damaged planet. And so I think this ethos of care is fundamental. And it's yet another place, Allan, where the left can actually be asserting something that speaks to something universal in people, that speaks to the dignity that we want for our elders, for the panic that we feel for our kids, and for the love that we feel for each other. And there is a universal framework, movement, philosophy, ideology that can be built on the foundation of care, and it's just waiting there for us, just hanging there, and everybody needs it. The whole thing about Tommy Douglas's dream for Medicare. You think eyes, teeth, mental health, and medicine is not part of your health? We're only halfway there. I mean, we're privatizing the shit out of what remains of our public healthcare system, but that we never actually got the whole thing. And go down the list, care is the missing piece in every part of the economy. So care, Jesse, thank you.
Right on.
Thanks for the chance for that.
Do you mind if I change the subject, Allan?
Go right ahead.
Hetty Fry. Not everybody is running up against a veteran of politics, a very popular politician, but someone who, correct me if I'm wrong, is on the left of the Liberal Party, right? So, again,
what does that even mean? I don't know.
Fair enough.
Is Chrystia Freeland to the left of Mark Carney? What do these things even mean when you're talking about
I would say no to that question. But
well, Hetty's a big supporter of Chrystia, so.
Okay, fair enough. What do you think of your opponent? What when you're going door to door, other than speaking to the big issues, are you having to address the incumbent? Because incumbents have a lot of power in politics. Even if I agree the center is collapsing. I think liberalism is in an existential crisis. But nonetheless, I think fear of America, fear of Polyev is already causing people to look past issues and to focus on really silly stuff. So before we conclude, I have to ask you, how are you handling your opponent and how does that factor into your campaigning?
Well, I hope it won't surprise you that I have a rather old school approach to these things. I'm weary of the politics of assassination, of character assassination and nicknames and all this stuff. As much as I can laugh at my kids' Jimmy Kimmel list, I really think it's toxic and horrible, and it's damaging. I mean, who would want to go into politics? It just seems so smug and ugly. And so I got a lot of respect for Hetty. She's the longest sitting MP in the House of Commons. She's won 10 elections. And
Amazing.
and it's
1993, eh?
well, yeah. I mean, and
Beat
the
Kim
last
Campbell.
Conservative elected in
Yeah.
Vancouver Centre was the
Kim
first
Campbell.
female prime minister. Yes.
Yeah.
So, so I hope Hetty remembers that because it was an important moment for us all. And Kim Campbell, like let's give a little love to Kim Campbell here. She famously said that elections are not a great time to talk about issues, and she just got absolutely excoriated. Yeah, Alan, you remember this, Jesse? I think you were 9. But
I'm much older than that. But please
And
continue.
I went on record saying, when is telling the truth become bad politics?
There you go, right?
You know.
Yeah, it was a sad moment. Maybe it wasn't a smart thing to say in an election, but it's not untrue. I have a lot of respect for Hetty, and not going to trash her. She was elected a long time ago, so long ago that I was on Much Music when she was elected. And that is a very long time ago indeed.
Although, if we really wanted to get an audience with this podcast, we would have been talking about Much Music the entire time. But please continue.
Do you want to hear about my Bon Jovi interview? Do you want to hear about, I'm happy to go there.
No, we want Moses Dirt. Everyone wants Moses Dirt. Sorry,
yeah.
Avi, please.
Oh, yes. No, now you've got me distracted. That's what I want. I discovered in learning a little bit about my opponent that she was a crusading doctor in the HIV/AIDS space in the 80s, which was really important. She's got a special sauce, and this is not a small thing to try to flip a riding. What I know and what I hear every single night at the doors is that people want change, and that people of this riding don't want the Tories. I mean, I don't think there's a single, in the current configuration, very, very volatile. Liberals seem to be coming back now. Who knows what it'll be in a few weeks' time? We may be in an election in a few weeks' time. I don't think there's a safe riding in the country from a Conservative surge. But I do think that Toronto Centre, Vancouver Centre, some of the really, deep downtown ridings of the urban spaces of our country are less likely to elect Conservatives. And if people want to change and they still want progressive representation, I have a huge amount of energy as your back-end open source platform probably is buckled under the weight of what I'm screaming at my little remote mic here. And I have a passion for Vancouver, which comes from the zeal of a convert. I didn't grow up in this city. I have fallen in love with the city, and it is the most beautiful city in the world. And it should not be just a playground for the rich. We should not be driving out the working class soul of this city. Already, it's gentrified way more than it ought to be. And there's so much to save here. And Vancouver is like a symbol for so many of the challenges facing urban centers around the country and around the world. And this is where the rubber meets the road. I mean, we have to fight for people to actually have a roof over their heads, have food that they can afford, and have an economy that's not dominated by a 300-pound gorilla, which is threatening us on a daily basis. And the fight is right here in Vancouver Centre. So I welcome it. I'd love a chance to debate Hetty. I had her on Counterspan a couple times in the late 90s. Unfortunately, the deeply careless executive producer of that show erased my entire oeuvre from that era after I'd asked for it a number of times over the years. But I did, in this very apartment, which we've taken over from my in-laws, I found a cabinet filled with VHS tapes. When I was the new boyfriend in the 90s, my beautiful in-laws taped a lot of Counterspans.
Right on.
So I have a little bit, and I've been searching through those to see if there's a clip of me and Hetty. I haven't found one yet.
Well, I didn't have the total collection. I had a digital archive, of the show that you should have mentioned. I don't know if I have it any longer, but it's probably in my hard drive closet. So we can follow up on that off air.
Let's do it.
I have two final quick questions. Alan, do you have any last questions before we start to wrap up?
Go ahead.
The first, in terms of donations, because I have to admit, I'm not fully clear on this. Can people outside of the riding donate to your campaign?
Absolutely. I mean, jump on board, Jesse. Half the country's donated to my campaign. No,
I'm flat
yes,
broke.
absolutely. Yeah, no, you.
But this is where I bring up, for those watching on YouTube, Avi's voteavi.ca, and check out his website and donate, because as he mentioned, money does matter in politics.
Yes, indeed.
So I very much wanted to make that clear so that our non-BC listeners can support you and your campaign.
No, and you know, I have long relationships in different movements around the country, and I've been doing work nationally for 3 decades or more, and it's been really heartening to see the support from across the country. I feel really blessed to have it as a candidate, because a lot of unelecteds don't.
Right on.
But and people also phone bank for me from around the country. Like we're just gearing up the kind of national push. And there will be a few ridings across the country where there's the infrastructure, and we've built it here in Vancouver Centre to actually onboard people from anywhere. And the time change works in our favor for once. So people in the Eastern time zone can make phone calls at dinner time BC without staying up as late as we would need to for you.
Yes. And then finally, the guilt trip that we often do at the end of every podcast is where we ask the current guest with help for future guests. So,
oh shit, I just got the time change completely reversed. No, you have to be a night owl. Excuse me.
Yes.
You have to be a night owl. So Jesse, all your friends can call up until midnight on your end. That's right.
Yes. So to get to the ask, can you put in a good word with Naomi to come on the show and talk about the way the shock doctrine is being played out?
No, you guys don't get the Klein. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No.
Second,
hard line.
Second, since your facetious no there was not met with the humor you had intended.
Sorry.
Well, I totally acknowledge that there is a huge difference between federal and provincial NDP. If you have a friend who has a friend who can get word into Merritt Stiles, that we would love to have her on the podcast.
Oh.
I've done that through other friends of friends.
Cool.
But obviously, as the campaign is going, it would be an absolute treat to have her join us, as highly unlikely as it may be. So again, I'm asking you if you know friends who have friends.
I think you two are both, like emeritus Heartland, Ontario media personalities. I think the pull is there.
Right on.
Well,
I'd be happy
the
to
other
help with
thing,
either.
one of the older maxims in politics is that no one's ever voted for someone they've never heard of. There's 50% of Ontarians right now have no feelings about her one way or the other.
Yeah.
And that's her biggest opponent right now.
Yeah.
And I'm personally, in the chat rooms I'm in, having a hard time getting people to look at the NDP because on a provincial level, it doesn't have the same connection. And I've been poking a lot of the candidates I know running for MPP to kind of engage in this digital sphere because, to your point, Jugmeat does very successfully, and it does make a difference. So again, if you could put in a good word, that helps.
Yeah, I mean, I think I suffer the same fate. Like people in Vancouver Centre, unless they're truly aged, virtually if not effectively retired, like you two. I mean, how would they know who I am? But we have to reach people with the power of our ideas and the magnetism of our podcasts. I mean, that's how we're going to bring the youth in the door. It's I just believe in talking to everybody the same. I really do. Like I just think the cynicism with politics is real. I see sometimes a leader that's struggling or whatever, and I feel like they're trapped sometimes in technocratic the way that politics is done these days. And I know I have a lot of freedom as one local candidate that to experiment, to iterate, to try things, to really put the focus on organizing and talking to people. It's not a guaranteed path, and it's not the only thing that works. You have to fight in the digital sphere. You have to campaign in the air war and the communication space. It has to be all of the above. But this culture of actually talking to neighbors, I think it's something that the NDP originated in the Canadian political space. The Riverdale by-election of 1963 or something. My mom and dad worked on the first, the sort of premiere of this knock every door and then knock it again. There's a ton of creativity and spirit and connection in this kind of politics. And I think it has all kinds of other benefits that right now the populist right is offering. And so it's connected to all the stuff we've been talking about.
Don't want to keep you forever, Abby, but before you came on, we were talking about Matt Price. Have you ever run across him in the Vancouver area?
Name sounds familiar, but I'm not sure.
He was very, very instrumental in organizing the Dogwood Initiative. You talked about your canvasser who's doing it for mental health. I mean, he has developed a whole thesis around organization and agency and empowerment. Instead of, typically a political campaign, you have your campaign headquarters and it does everything and, tries to get down to all those doors that on the street. He puts it exactly opposite. What your job is to find out who in this block is going to be the block captain. That's their job. Why don't you? And giving these people a sense of power. Your job, there's 48 people here. We got in the last election, we got 6 of them. Your job is to get 9. This time. And he said the difference in terms of both outcome, but also in terms of the sense of loyalty that these individuals have for the organization as a consequence of being empowered and having that agency is, anyway, it's again, something that we're just kind of flirting around with as part of this whole social movement.
I think it's fundamental. I mean, it's so exciting. Like, you guys know big organizing, the approach and rules for revolutionaries, written by Becky Bond and Zach Mallitz. The whole notion of trusting the base, giving people the keys, empowering people to do their own organizing. This is available, to not just to any political party or to any particular campaign, but to any movement. And it really is. It's a kind of politics that comes from a love of people. And I think, and there's always going to be, there's going to be embarrassing mistakes, and someone will say something gross in a chat and you have to, or someone will turn out to be an unpleasant, and you gotta, self-correct. But the obsession with control and the idea that the base is an unruly force to be managed.
Yeah. There's just arms and legs.
It's a dead end. It's a dead end. People are too smart for it. People feel taken advantage. People want the agency. And when you give them a space where they're able to lead, you see them flourish and lead. And that's when politics just is no longer a spectator sport, but it's also a really compelling alternative to lying on the couch and doom scrolling. That's a fundamental problem.
Last question for me. If you had to guess, when are the writs going to be issued for the federal election?
Well, there's a lot of talk right now that Carney doesn't want to go. I mean, I think it's a given that Carney will be the leader of the Liberals.
Right.
And I don't think he wants to recall Parliament and not have a seat. I don't think, one scenario might be they write a throne speech, which is their election pitch, and then they pull the plug before there's even a non-confidence vote on it. But he might just go. I mean, the numbers seem to be going up for him. So he might be leader on the 9th and
mid-early
call
March.
The election on the 10th.
Yeah.
It could easily happen. We're certainly ready. We're chomping at the bit.
You talk about Kim Campbell. I mean, she did make some significant errors during the campaign, and as I said, is that the voters basically reroute to conclusion they had reached 2 years earlier. Right. That said, she was the leader there for 7 months, during which she was ahead in the polls the whole time. Yeah, and you may be right. It may be in Carney's interest just to say, I got a little puff of wind in my sails here right now. Let's pull this plug.
Let's see if we can keep it going.
Yeah.
But that's. I mean, it needs to be said that we're also in an existential moment around how we respond to this brute force economic warfare from the United States.
Yeah, and you got a 40-day period where you're not
people in Canada love it when parties work together. As much as people are mad at the NDP for propping up the libs and blah blah blah, and Poilievre's been going on about that forever. People love it when political parties and classes come together. And the notion that we could do that, recall Parliament, actually have a coordinated response, set down the assassination, the character assassination machinery for a minute. I think Canadians would be thrilled at that. I don't think people are hungry for an election. Yeah. It's a terrible timing, but we'll do what we got to do. But come on, this could actually be great if we came together and had a response that restored our economic sovereignty. I would even work with Liberals to do that. But luckily, I'm not in the decision-making chair.
Well, and since we are at an end, one of the things we've been talking about in a rather alarmist way on this podcast is it could be worse, and that will require a kind of unity government, as it were, to mitigate that. So my last question is, Avi, my dog's willing, after you're elected and you become a real hotshot in the national political scene, will you still have time for us?
I mean,
will you come back on the podcast?
I'll have to. I like the way you're building in the future guilt mechanism. Plant that seed, harvest it later. Of course, Jesse.
Right on.
Come on,
right
Jesse. You fixed my email for years, as you did for most of the left in Canada throughout the 1990s. How could I not?
Right on.
How could
right
I
on.
not? I didn't even know what email was when you fixed it the first time.
Well, and this has been, I think, a fantastic conversation that really gets to, what we're trying to do here on Red-Tory, which is enact the Overton window shift that you are actively engaged in. So let us know how we can help. And thanks again, Avi. This has been really a fantastic chat. Vote avi.ca and avilewis.ca, and I'm saying that so the AI doing the transcript gets it right and puts the URL out there. Red-Tory, we're on YouTube and all the podcast networks, and of course on Substack. And we'll see you soon, hopefully with an episode as fantastic as this one. Take care.
Thanks, you guys.